And for God's sake, specialist, secure that mess on your head. This is the United States Army, not a coffee shop in Portland, the parade ground, baked to the consistency of terracotta under the relentless Nevada sun, fell into a brittle silence. The crowd of soldiers, a mixture of seasoned NCOs and fresh-faced lieutenants, shuffled their feet on the hot gravel, the sound like a collective nervous cough. They laughed, a thin and hesitant ripple of amusement that died as quickly as it was born, their eyes darting between the source of the insult and its target. But when General Croft, observing from the shaded porch of the command building, saw the woman's stance, the unyielding stillness, the perfect economy of her posture, he felt a cold prickle of recognition that had nothing to do with the desert heat. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, a forgotten memory stirring in the deep archives of his 3-decade career. The woman, identified on the roster as Specialist Anna Morgan, did not flinch. She did not blush. Her hands, resting loosely at her sides, did not clench into fists. She simply stood there, a portrait of unnerving calm, her gaze fixed on the distant heat shimmer rising from the desolate mountain range that ringed the base. Major Evans, the officer whose voice still hung in the air, sharp and condescending, took her silence as submission. He was a man whose authority was built on volume, whose confidence was a fragile veneer of sarcasm and regulation quoting. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, and with a theatrical flourish of disgust, he reached out and flicked a single, errant strand of brown hair that had escaped her tightly wound bun. It was a gesture of profound contempt, a public violation of personal space designed to strip away the last vestiges of her dignity. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by competence, type legacy in the comments below. The Major's act of petty tyranny was a performance, and he was an actor who savored his monologue. "Is that clear, Specialist?" he sneered, his face uncomfortably close to hers. The smell of his cheap cologne and self-satisfaction was a suffocating cloud. He was a man who saw the world through the narrow lens of his own limited experience, a gatekeeper who confused his rank with wisdom. He saw a small, unassuming woman in a uniform that seemed a size too big, a name on a transfer list from a non-combat support unit, and he had already written her entire story in his head. In his version, she was a diversity hire, a box ticker, someone who had slipped through the cracks and landed here, at the Army's premier long-range marksmanship and technology evaluation center, by some bureaucratic error. The other soldiers watched, their faces a mixture of pity and a grim, self-preserving relief that they were not the ones in the crosshairs of his derision. They were complicit in their silence, a silent chorus affirming the Major's power. They saw what he saw because it was easier than questioning the established order. Yet, Morgan's reaction, or lack thereof, was a quiet defiance that was more unsettling than any shouted retort. Her breathing remained slow and even a measured cadence of absolute control. Her eyes, a pale, clear blue, did not waver from the horizon. It was as if she were a stone in a river, and his torrent of insults was just water, loud and agitated, but ultimately powerless to move her. She was here for the final phase of the XM-250 evaluation, a next-generation weapon system so advanced it was rumored to have a mind of its own. The test today was the cold-bore dead-stick shot, a legendary feat of marksmanship and technical acumen that had become a myth on the base. A single shot from a cold rifle at an unknown distance with all digital assists disabled. No one had made the shot in over 3 years. It was a test designed to break egos, to separate the truly gifted from the merely competent. For Major Evans, it was the perfect stage to publicly validate his own prejudices and prove this unimpressive specialist was a fraud. He gestured dismissively toward the firing line. "Well, don't just stand there, Specialist Morgan. You are holding up the evaluation. Let's see what the support battalion has taught you." The firing point was a lonely concrete platform overlooking a vast, empty expanse of desert. The air was thick with a palpable tension, a mixture of professional curiosity and the lingering residue of Major Evans's public humiliation. As Specialist Morgan approached the station, her movements were a study in fluid efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every step was deliberate, every gesture practiced to the point of instinct. She laid her rifle case on the shooting mat and unlatched it with a series of quiet, precise clicks. The weapon inside, the XM250, was a thing of brutalist beauty, a fusion of carbon fiber and advanced alloys. But it was the other rifle in the case, nestled beside the new tech, that drew a few curious glances. It was an old M21, the wooden stock worn smooth and dark with a patina of age and countless hours of handling. It looked like a museum piece, an anachronism from a different era of warfare. Major Evans scoffed audibly. "What's this, Specialist? Bringing Grandpa's hunting rifle for show and tell?" Morgan ignored him. She lifted the XM250 from its case, her hands moving over the weapon with a familiarity that was both intimate and deeply professional. She seated the magazine with a solid, definitive thwack. She checked the chamber. She adjusted the bipod. Each action was a small, silent ritual, a physical mantra that centered her mind and shut out the noise of the world. She settled behind the rifle, her body becoming one with the machine. Her cheek found the stock, her eye found the scope, and the world outside the circular lens simply ceased to exist. The range officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, flat and impersonal. "Target is live. Distance is unknown. Wind is variable, 3 to 5 miles per hour, gusting to 8, full value from the left. All targeting assists are disabled. You are on your own, Specialist. Shooter, you have the range." Silence descended again, deeper this time, heavier. Every eye was on the small figure on the concrete platform. Evans stood with his arms crossed, a smug smirk plastered on his face, waiting for the inevitable failure. The silence stretched, becoming a character in itself. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with 1,000 unasked questions and a universe of unspoken assumptions. For 60 seconds, Morgan did not move. To the untrained eye, she was frozen, perhaps with fear or indecision. Major Evans shifted his weight, impatience radiating from him. "Any day now, Specialist," he muttered, just loud enough for those around him to hear. But General Croft, watching through a pair of high-powered binoculars from his perch, saw something entirely different. He saw a master at work. He saw her left eye, the one not pressed to the scope, scanning the terrain, reading the subtle language of the desert. He saw the almost imperceptible sway of a distant creosote bush, the faint spiral of dust kicked up by a thermal updraft 1,000 yards away. She was not just looking. She was listening with her eyes, feeling the pulse of the environment. Her right index finger rested on the outside of the trigger guard, a perfect example of trigger discipline. Her breathing, which he could almost imagine, had slowed to a yogic rhythm. Each inhale and exhale a measured cycle designed to find the natural respiratory pause, that fleeting moment of perfect stillness between heartbeats. Then she moved. It was a small, almost infinitesimal adjustment of the elevation turret on her scope. A single, crisp click. Another small adjustment to the windage knob. 2 clicks. She had made her calculation. There was no computer, no laser rangefinder, no meteorological sensor feeding her data. There was only her, the rifle, and a lifetime of experience compressed into a single, intuitive judgment. Her finger moved from the guard to the trigger. She exhaled, slowly, completely, and in the silent valley of her breath, she pressed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a controlled and familiar violence. The report was a sharp, clean crack that echoed off the distant mountains, a single, definitive punctuation mark at the end of a long, silent sentence. And then, the silence returned, absolute and deafening, as every person on that range held their breath, their eyes straining to see the result. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing. Then a faint metallic ping drifted back across the desert, a sound so clear and pure it seemed to hang in the dry air like a tiny, perfect bell. The sound was impossible. It was the auditory signature of a copper-jacketed bullet striking a 12-inch steel plate. But at what distance? The target, a small, faded red circle painted on the plate, was a barely visible speck, a visual ghost shimmering in the atmospheric distortion. The range officer, his voice now stripped of its bored monotone and filled with a raw, crackling astonishment, fumbled with his controls. On the large display screen behind the firing line, which had been showing a wide-angle view of the range, the image suddenly switched to the target camera. The view zoomed in, shaky at first, then sharpening into a devastatingly clear picture. There, exactly in the center of the red circle, was a fresh, dark puncture mark. A perfect shot, a dead-center, cold-bore dead-stick hit. A collective gasp, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock, washed over the crowd of soldiers. Phones, which had been put away, were suddenly out, their cameras pointed at the screen as if to capture proof of a miracle. The nervous laughter that had accompanied Morgan's humiliation was gone, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. All eyes turned from the screen to the woman on the platform, and then, inevitably, to Major Evans. The Major's face had collapsed. The smugness, the arrogance, the certitude. It had all evaporated, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. "No," he whispered, the word a small, broken thing. "No way. That's not possible. That target is at 1,800 meters. 1,800. No one makes that shot. It was luck. A 1 in a million lucky shot." But his protest was weak, his voice thin and reedy. He knew, and everyone there knew, that what they had just witnessed was not luck. It was a demonstration of a level of skill so far beyond their comprehension that it bordered on the supernatural. It was competence made manifest. It was a silent, irrefutable answer to his every insult, a single, perfectly placed round that had not only hit its target, but had utterly demolished his entire worldview. As the wave of stunned murmurs began to swell, a new sound cut through the air. It was the sound of heavy boots striding purposefully across the gravel. General Croft descended the steps from the command building, his face a granite mask of grim purpose. He didn't run. He walked with a measured, deliberate pace that radiated an authority more potent than any shouted command. The crowd parted for him instinctively, a sea of uniforms making way for its admiral. He walked past the gawking soldiers, past the dumbstruck range officers, and stopped directly behind Major Evans, who was still staring at the screen, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality of the image. The general said nothing. He simply stood there, his presence a heavy weight in the suddenly still air. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable resonance of command. It was a voice that had briefed presidents and ordered men into battle, and it sliced through the atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "Major Evans," he said, the words cold and hard as diamonds. Evans flinched, turning slowly as if waking from trance. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Sir," he stammered. General Croft didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the small, quiet figure of Specialist Morgan, who was now methodically clearing her weapon, her movements as calm and precise as they had been before the shot. "Give me her file," the general commanded, not to Evans, but to his aide, who was already sprinting back toward the command building. Now, a moment later, the aide returned, holding a standard military-issue tablet. He handed it to the general. Croft's thumb moved across the screen, his eyes scanning the digital text. The silence on the range was now absolute. The only sound was the whispering of the desert wind. He looked up from the tablet, his gaze finally falling upon Major Evans. It was a look of profound, Arctic disappointment. "You are a major in the United States Army," Croft began, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You are entrusted with the leadership of soldiers. Your judgment is supposed to be your sharpest weapon. And you stood here on my range, in front of my soldiers, and you chose to publicly humiliate a fellow service member based on what? The length of her hair? The patch on her uniform?" He held up the tablet, turning the screen so Evans could see it. "Read it, Major. Read out loud. For everyone." Major Evans's eyes fell to the screen. His hands trembled as he took the tablet. The words on the digital page seemed to swim before his eyes, each line a fresh indictment of his own staggering ignorance. He began to read, his voice a choked, barely audible mumble. Name Morgan, Anna, he swallowed hard. Rank, he stopped, his eyes widening in horror. He looked from the tablet to the woman on the firing line and back again. The designation, specialist, was nowhere to be found. Read it, Major, General Croft commanded, his voice devoid of any pity. Evans's voice cracked. Rank, Master Sergeant. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. A Master Sergeant, an E8, a senior non-commissioned officer, a backbone of the Army, a leader of soldiers with probably more time in service than Evans himself. The Major's public humiliation of a specialist was bad enough. His treatment of a Master Sergeant was an offense of a different magnitude, a catastrophic failure of military courtesy and basic respect. But the general was not finished. Keep reading, Major. Evans's eyes scanned further down the page, his face growing paler with every line. Primary military occupational specialty. 18Z, Special Forces Senior Sergeant, the crowd gasped. 18Z, a Green Beret. Not just a soldier, but a member of one of the most elite, most demanding, and most respected communities in the entire United States military. These are the quiet professionals, the warrior scholars, the men, and now, the women, who operated in the shadows, far from the parade grounds and the spit-shined world of conventional Army life. Go on, Croft insisted, his voice relentless. Deployments, classified. Combat record, classified. Awards and decorations. Evans's voice was now just a whisper. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V4 Valor, 3 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart, 2 oak leaf clusters. Distinguished Rifleman Badge. President's 100 Tab. The list went on, a litany of honor and sacrifice, each award a testament to a level of courage and expertise that Evans could barely comprehend. The final line on the screen was a note from the Asymmetric Warfare Group. Subject is currently assigned to this command TAD under assumed rank for the purposes of providing an unbiased, ground-level technical and operational evaluation of the XM250 platform. She is considered the foremost small-arms subject matter expert in the Department of Defense. The tablet slipped from Evans's numb fingers, clattering onto the concrete. He stared at the woman, Master Sergeant Anna Morgan, who had now finished cleaning her weapon and was placing it back in its case with the same serene calm she had displayed all along. She was not just a soldier. She was a legend, and he had tried to break her. The story of what happened on a range that day did not just spread, it detonated. It moved with the speed of light through the base's fiber optic network and with the persistence of gossip through its human equivalent. Before the sun had even set behind the mountains, the legend of Master Sergeant Morgan was being told in the barracks, whispered in the hushed tones of the Chow Hall, and debated in the smoky haze of the off-base VFW post. It was a modern military fable, a perfect story for an age of digital myth-making. The details were repeated with a mix of reverence and embellishment. The way Major Evans had flicked her hair, the impossible distance of a shot, the cold, hard list of her accomplishments, the general's public rebuke. The photo of the bullet hole, dead center in the steel plate, became the most forwarded image on the base, a digital icon of absolute competence. It was the shot heard round the post, a single round that had recalibrated the entire social hierarchy of the installation. Rank and title, which had seemed so solid that morning, now felt flimsy and conditional. The real currency, everyone was reminded, was skill. It was the quiet, undeniable proof of what you could do, not the noise you made about who you were. For the junior enlisted, it was a source of immense inspiration. Morgan became a symbol of a deeper, more just version of the Army they had signed up for, an institution where merit, not prejudice, was the final arbiter of worth. For the NCO Corps, it was a moment of profound validation. She was one of them, a living embodiment of the quiet professionalism and lead-from-the-front ethos that was the heart and soul of their creed. They saw in her the best of themselves. And for the officer corps, it was a sobering, necessary lesson. It was a stark reminder that true leadership was not about giving orders, but about listening, not about asserting dominance, but about earning respect. Major Evans was not formally court-martialed, but his punishment was in many ways far more severe. General Croft ordered him to deliver a formal, public apology to Master Sergeant Morgan in front of the same group of soldiers who had witnessed his initial offense. The next morning, at the same parade ground, Evans stood before her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out shame. His uniform, usually immaculate, seemed ill-fitting. His voice, once a bullhorn of self-importance, was quiet and unsteady. "Master Sergeant Morgan," he began, his eyes fixed on a point on the ground just in front of her boots. "I have no excuse for my conduct. My actions were unprofessional, disrespectful, and a disgrace to my rank and to the uniform I wear. I made an assumption based on ignorance and prejudice. I was wrong. I apologized." The silence that followed was thick with anticipation. What would she do? Would she dress him down, using her newfound status to return the humiliation he had dealt her? Would she deliver a lecture on leadership and respect? Master Sergeant Morgan didn't either. She looked at him, her pale blue eyes holding his for the first time. There was no anger in them, no satisfaction, only a calm, analytical neutrality. "Apology accepted, Major," she said, her voice even and direct. "Now we have a problem to solve." She gestured toward the range. "The XM250's optic mount is coming loose under sustained recoil. It's a design flaw. Your officers are the ones who will be leading the soldiers using this weapon in the field. They need to understand its weaknesses. Let's get to work." And with that, she turned and walked toward the armory, leaving a stunned Major Evans and an awestruck crowd in her wake. For the rest of the week, she didn't just teach them, she rebuilt them. She spent 12 hours a day on the range, not with sergeants and specialists, but with Evans and his entire cohort of lieutenants and captains. She broke down the science of ballistics, the art of reading the wind, the discipline of breath control. She did it all with no ego, no condescension, only a relentless focus on the mission. She was turning his moment of greatest shame into the most important training his officers had ever received. He had tried to make her an example of failure. She was making him a student of true excellence. Weeks turned into months. Master Sergeant Morgan completed her evaluation and was gone as quietly as she had arrived, a ghost who had passed through the base and fundamentally altered its landscape. But her legacy remained, etched into the institutional memory of the post. The firing point where she had made the impossible shot was now, informally known as Morgan's Line. It became a rite of passage for new snipers to attempt the shot, not with any real hope of making it, but as an act of respect, a tribute to the standard she had set. The story of that day became a mandatory part of the in-processing brief for all new officers arriving at the base. It was told not as a piece of gossip, but as a formal lesson in leadership, a cautionary tale about the poison of assumption. The instructor, more often than not, was Major Evans himself. The experience had not broken him. It had reforged him. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and what emerged was a humbler, wiser, and far more effective leader. He was now the first to listen to his NCOs, the first to solicit a contrary opinion, the first to caution a young, overzealous lieutenant against judging a soldier by their appearance. He told the story of his own failure without flinching, using his personal shame as a powerful tool to teach the most important lesson a leader can learn, that you never know who is standing in your ranks. The wooden-stocked M21 rifle she had brought with her, which Evans had so callously dismissed, also became part of the legend. A crusty old master gunner in the armory, who had recognized the rifle, later told a few of his protégés the story. It had belonged to a legendary Delta Force sniper who had been killed in a classified operation years ago. He was Morgan's mentor. She carried it not as a museum piece, but as a reminder, a connection to a legacy of quiet professionalism that stretched back generations. Her competence wasn't just her own. It was inherited, earned, and honored. Years later, a newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel Evans stood on that same range, now a respected and admired battalion commander. He was watching a young sergeant, a woman's thea, shared Morgan's quiet intensity, patiently instructing a group of nervous privates on the fundamentals of marksmanship. One of the young soldiers, frustrated with his performance, threw his helmet on the ground in a fit of pique. Before Evans could intervene, the sergeant walked over, picked up the helmet, and handed it back to the soldier. She didn't yell. She spoke to him in a low, calm voice, her words inaudible from a distance, but her effect was immediate. The young private's shoulders straightened. He nodded, took a deep breath, and got back behind his rifle. Evans smiled. He saw the echo of Morgan's competence, the ripple effect of her actions spreading through time, passed from one quiet professional to another. True legacy, he had learned, wasn't a statue or a plaque on a wall. It wasn't about the stories people told about you after you were gone. It was about the standards you set, the lessons you taught, and the competence you inspired in others. It was a living, breathing thing, a flame passed from one torch to the next, burning brightest in the actions of those who came after. Far away, in another desert, on another continent, a woman with pale blue eyes and an unassuming demeanor lay on a rooftop, her old M21 rifle beside her. She was watching a high-value target through a scope, her breathing slow and steady, her mind a calm ocean of focus. No one in the city below knew her name. No one in the command structure above her fully knew her story. But her actions were about to change the course of a conflict. Her silence was her language. Her competence was her legacy. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.